Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am so pleased to have Claudia Wenger back again as my guest today. Claudia's organization is called Claudia Cares Consulting and supports individuals with special needs and their families during the transition from school to adult services by structured assessment, goal identification, accessing adult services, and parent training. She has experience working in public and private schools and developing and managing adult services vendored by the Regional Center and the Department of Rehabilitation, with a focus on inclusion and self-determination. Claudia holds a bachelor's degree in education and a master's in special education from the University of Southern California. She has helped many families successfully launch their children with special needs into adulthood. Welcome, Claudia. I'm so glad you could join me today to discuss supported living services.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad you could come back. And basically, if you would start off by just letting everybody know what supported living services are and how to access them, what it means, and the kinds of services that are provided under this particular umbrella.
Sure. Supported living services is a service that allows individuals with special needs to live independently in their own home in the community of their choice, which is a little bit different than what the traditional service that people think of as group homes. Because group homes, what they do is you'll identify a group home that you want to live in, and you'll live there. But that house is where the house is. And the roommates or the housemates and people who live there are who they are, and the service that is provided is dependent on the level of that home. Supported living services is completely different. The individual gets to choose his own apartment or home or condo in the city that he wants to live in, the state that he wants to live in, and the support is what he or she wants or needs in that particular time, and can change over time as well. So that's a very big difference between the way the two services are provided. So that's how it looks in the big picture.
And there are differences also between supported living service and something called, which is often abbreviated as SLS, and something called ILS, or independent living services, correct?
Correct. So the main difference between the two is that supported living services could be up to 24 hours, 7 days a week, and independent living services is generally less hours, and that's going to depend on, in California, you're a regional center, and throughout the country it's going to look a little bit different because everywhere looks at it a little different. Independent living services' ultimate goal is towards total independence, and so the idea is that the support comes in to teach the individual with the idea that over time that would be reduced. Some individuals are going to need and require supported living services because they need 24/7, and that may never reduce, so it could be a lifetime service. So can ILS, by the way. So you might start with more hours and reduce to less, but not necessarily reduced to zero.
And there's also, I know a lot of times people get confused because there are so many different umbrellas under which these services fall. So aside from SLS and ILS, there's also something called adaptive skills training. Is that correct? And also IHSS, which is in-home supported services. So I just thought maybe we would take just a few minutes before we get back to the details about SLS to just perhaps identify some differences between those services so people really understand what the different functionalities are.
So I'm going to put IHSS on the side for a second. Adaptive skills is generally thought of as somewhere where you're teaching someone how to do something. And it can start and often does start when the individual is still living at home and is a child. And generally, once you start supported living services, adaptive living skills goes away. The truth of the matter is that most of these services are not necessarily, they don't have exact rules for them. So it's not an absolute, but usually when you have supported living services, you don't have adaptive living services, adaptive skills services, and if you have ILS, you don't have adaptive skills services. And usually when you're a kid living at home, you have adaptive skills services. ILS services usually only kick in about 6 months before you move out. So ILS and SLS is intended for independent living outside of your family's home. So that's in general, but that doesn't mean that the rules are so strict, and you have to look at the individual needs of the person and, probably your regional center when you're living in California, and in the nation at large, it's going to be a little bit different depending on the state.
Okay, and these, just to clarify, these are services that are provided through the regional centers, correct?
They are through the regional centers, correct, in California.
Okay.
Whereas there are no cost to the family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Whereas I know I briefly mentioned IHSS. That's something that is separate from the regional center, more through the Medicaid system, if I'm correct. Or in California, as it's referred to, Medi-Cal, something that's provided through that part of the system and not through the regional center.
So
correct?
IHSS, in-home health support services, is what the regional center calls a generic service. They're both funded by Medi-Cal and Medicaid, but the funding source is not really relevant right now. But the way regional center looks at IHSS is that IHSS is a generic service, meaning it doesn't cost the regional center anything, and it's a service that's provided for everybody, not just somebody with special needs. So you do have to qualify for the service and go through that service. And the way supported living services is generally built is on some IHSS hours, and then whatever hours IHSS does not provide, the rest of them are provided through the regional center. And typically the most IHSS hours you can get, and this number fluctuates depending on sometimes depending on funding. So it's usually 283 hours maximum, I believe, or 286 maximum. And then the rest of the hours for the month would come through the regional center.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Currently, I think it's at 283. Yeah. So if somebody wanted to apply, let's say, for IHSS, they would do that through the Medicaid or Medi-Cal office, and if somebody wanted to then go for the supported living service or the SLS, they would do that through their regional center, correct?
IHSS is accessed through in-home health support services. If you just Google that, it will tell you exactly how to go ahead and apply for it. Regional Center will also give you information on how to apply for it. And it is a separate service. And to do supported living services, the Regional Center is going to require you to apply for it. However, what's really important to understand is that IHSS workers are not necessarily trained to work with individuals with special needs. And some families, we're getting kind of more technical here, some families don't want IHSS because they don't want, some families are not going to want it because if something were to happen to individuals, then the state could come back and ask money from the individual's estate. And so they can say, no, we don't want IHSS. But we're kind of getting a little more technical here. In general, to get SLS, you need to have IHSS services. IHSS workers are not necessarily trained, and so that can be a little more complicated if the individual's needs are more complicated, and then you kind of have to figure it out with the regional center as well as with the IHSS how to get the hours to match properly. So that's really technical and space. It's really person-centered at that moment, and you really have to look at the technicalities of that.
Okay. So that would be taken on a case-by-case basis, really, and individual circumstance, something that you'd have to work out with the family and the regional center representative and IHSS and so forth.
The best entity to help you figure out that would be the supported living service agency, because what ends up happening is that when you want supported living services, you need to have an agency, unless you have self-determination, which is a whole other completely different, and that's going to change how this looks. But for traditional supported living services, you would have a vendored agency that is your supported living service agency, and they could really guide you on this IHSS piece, because what ends up happening is that although the supported living service agency is not the one overseeing the IHSS, because it's not their employees, they often find a way to work through it and make sure that it's working right. Sometimes they'll hire the IHSS worker, or the supported living service worker will do some supported living services and some IHSS services, so that they're able to combine the two together and make it work.
Right, because as I understand it, the IHSS worker can be anyone that the client wants it to be. So ostensibly, it could be the SLS worker as well. Could do both.
Correct. And that's, in many ways, I have found that that's more ideal, because then the IHSS worker is not working in a vacuum. The IHSS worker is already trained as your supported living services, and what you know, you can't unlearn it. So then your IHSS worker is a trained worker.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. So if you don't mind just outlining perhaps a few of the different kinds of support, the different kinds of services that fall under the SLS umbrella.
So the umbrella that's under that is just about everything, anything that would help an individual live on his own. So, for example, if somebody can't be left alone, they would have 24 hours and overnight support, even if it's just for the purpose of emergency. So if it's somebody that the concern would be that if somebody came knocking on the door, they would know what to do, or if there was a fire or an earthquake or a tornado or anything, if that individual can't sleep at night alone and handle an emergency, then they would need someone overnight. It could be somebody who needs support to go to the market, to clean, to cook, to ensure that they get to their program or to their job. So they would need 24/7. And in some cases, it could be 2-on-1. So if someone has more difficulties and needs more support, then they could have as much as 2-on-1. I've actually even heard of 3-on-1. So the whole point of supported living services is to ensure that the individual could live in his own home in the community that he or she wants to live in.
All right. So is there anything else specific that you'd like to add with regard to supported living services that I haven't asked you, something that you think that our listeners should definitely be aware of, or the most important takeaway from this particular conversation that the listeners should definitely remember?
So supported living does take time to put together. You can imagine moving out. Let's say if you're living at home and you're ready to move out, it's not done overnight. So if somebody wants to do this, it takes probably a good solid 6 months to get it going. Make sure that it's in your IPP, that is your goal. If the individual is still in high school under 22 and they would like to move out at the age of 22, this should probably be in their IEP a good year in advance and in the transition plan, so that everybody's aware this is happening, and the regional center should be brought into the IEPs as well. So that process begins in advance, because it can take 6 months up to a year to do it, especially if you want to live with a roommate and you need support from the regional center to find a roommate. They might be able to help with roommate matching as well. So it does take time, and that needs to be taken into consideration, as well as attempting to find housing, which can be very difficult depending on the area in which you live in.
Right. Well, very good advice. Very good advice there. So if our listeners have questions or want to know more, want to reach out to you, how can they contact you?
I can be contacted either by email, which is consulting@claudiacares.com, or by phone, which would be 818-345-6313.
Okay, and just to repeat that one more time, it's consulting@claudiacares.com. And you want to repeat the phone number one more time also?
818-345-6313.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much, Claudia, for joining me today and for the very helpful information that you've shared.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I also want to thank our listeners for spending a part of their day with us. I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.